A Woman's Guide to Creating Good People by Andrew D. Atkin, 6th of March 2015, and my blog is Building Utopia. Disclaimer. My background on the following topic is based on my general interest and exploration into psychology, human development, and the impact of childhood trauma most of all. I made the first part of my video in a step-by-step style, purely for the purpose of delivering my advice in the clearest, most direct, and most simple manner possible. My intention is not to tell people what to do, but to simply offer a guide based on decades of research. Part 1. The Basics. Let me give you the formula for creating good people, hard and fast. Step 1. Find a man you are truly attracted to, including sexually. Not just someone who makes sense for long-range life planning, or someone who has been arranged to you by your parents. Your instincts know what genes are good and compatible, to the end of achieving a strong and healthy baby. The cost of weak genes runs through your child's lifetime, of course, and are even intergenerational. Step 2. Get pregnant in your 20s. Not just before menopause. It makes sense to have your babies when your body is most competent for the job. It reduces the risk of problems such as Down syndrome and makes for a more robust baby overall. Step 3. Make sure you're happy and your life stress is low during pregnancy. Scientists now know that a baby's genes get switched on and off during pregnancy. The baby effectively reads the world through how its mother feels, and the baby's physiology in turn modifies itself in response to those signals. Step 4. Make sure your birthing process, which is a tremendously vulnerable time for any baby, comes with minimal trauma. This means go for a natural birth, not an elective C-section. Make sure the baby is placed on you immediately after birth for bonding. Don't cut the umbilical cord until your baby is independently breathing. Make sure you avoid drugging yourself and likewise your baby, unless you come to desperately need pain relief. Note that your baby's body is 10 times more sensitive to drugs than yours is. Keep the birthing room quiet and warm, and with low light. Do not circumcise your baby boy. I must say this can only be interpreted as serious child abuse. I recommend you watch Penn and Teller's great myth-busting episode on circumcision. You will find it on YouTube. Step 5. Stay at home with your child until they are at least 5 years old. If that is impossible, then at least try to stay with them until they are 2. An institute is not an ideal place for a very young child. They really need to be with their mothers. You will certainly find they are happier that way. Step 6. Isolate all personal life stresses while your children are very young. Your psychological state is basically your young child's world. Don't believe you can fake happiness. You can't. I have not spoken about blatant and serious child abuse because that stuff is clear. We all understand this is bad. Research has shown comprehensively that child abuse has serious and permanent effects. However, I firmly recommend Stefan Molyneux's excellent 40-minute overview on this, called The Bomb in the Brain. It's extremely interesting and a true must-watch. Indeed, I think it should be compulsory viewing for anyone engaged with families and public policy, at least. Conclusion to Part 1. Now that, very basically, is how you create good people. You just minimize damage to the child where it counts most of all, and make sure good genes are being brewed in healthy bodies, and bodies that are in a healthy state of mind. This is how you create people who will have no problem getting through life in a contented state, and people who will not suffer from all kinds of mental and physical disorders as a result of deeply imprinted trauma, bad epigenetic programming, and developmental deficiencies, etc. And it's how you create people who will generally have no need or desire to be corrupt or abusive towards others. Indeed, it's important to note that virtually all socially toxic behaviour is rooted in childhood deprivation and abuse. And this relates to the abuses we understand, and also the very early abuses around infancy and earlier that I've highlighted, that we do not, as a culture, yet fully understand. Part 2. Culture and Public Policy. Now let's take a look at what we have done as a society to the end of supporting, or should I say not supporting, the development of healthy and strong people. Knowing how to bring up a child is all very well, but being able to bring up a child well, or not, is of course the other part of the story. And that is what I now want to focus on. The following will relate to the industrialized Western world today. Let me give a basic list of what we have done to make having kids well so hard. Due to democracy at its worst, which, bluntly, is everybody else voting on how much money they can take out of your bank account, resources have been heavily driven away from young families and more towards pensioners, who are now living ever longer and more expensive lives. Unfortunately, democracy is a function of numbers and not necessarily fairness. I have a dedicated post relating to this problem in my Building Utopia blog titled Democracy at its Worst. The result is that we've made it very hard for young people to have their children at the most ideal time of their lives, which is in their early 20s. They just can't afford it, or at least not without welfare and some less than ideal compromises, such as outsourcing childcare to an institute because the mother has to work. Another key factor driving fertility into older age groups, due to costs, is the bloating out of tertiary education. This is a more tricky problem to understand, and I have a dedicated YouTube video on it here to keep my views simple, titled Education at its Worst. There is also the fact that children are not allowed to work until they're quite old, making them more of a liability for their parents and for much longer rather than a help. We seem to be loath to the idea of children helping out in the domestic and commercial world, as though the pressures of forced schooling are somehow any kinder. But it is interesting to note that if we reduce compulsory education to say 2 hours a day for basic maths and English, and let kids do some appropriate work for say 20 hours a week from the age of 10 or 12, it will be easy for most people to have children financially, while still leaving time for a child to independently master their interests, especially with the use of the internet. But this possibility has become illegal. So, bringing up kids must be terribly expensive. Huge resources go into education today, most of which, and I'm going to say it, is a ridiculous waste of time in terms of real learning substance. On top of this is the need for daycare and the fact that kids now have to be driven everywhere, as it seems, in part due to the great stranger danger myth. Also, in many places, the impact of housing unaffordability is a major factor. This problem also requires dedicated attention, and I have a YouTube video on it here titled Housing Affordability for Real. I could go on, but these are the key things that have both reduced fertility and driven it into older age groups. And as we can see, it has at least as much to do with government policy and propaganda as it has had to do with authentic individual choice. Population control. Is this what it's really all about? Now, at the risk of sounding like a conspiracy theorist, I will note that since the 1960s, public policy has been structured to the effect of suppressing fertility in the industrialized world, and it has done so very well. This again relates to the variables I previously spoke about. Now, I can't know how deliberate a population agenda is, if it is deliberate, but what we can know is that it's true that the baby boom needed to end, and the social planners from the past must have surely understood the fact of it. So you do have to wonder, and this is my point, if the very real and successful focus on population control in the third world today, that Hans Rosling's population documentary highlights, was not also similarly directed on the now first world, starting from 50 years ago or more. Again, I don't know. We can't know what goes on behind closed political doors. But it really is remarkable how so many otherwise crazy movements and public policy positions of our time do in fact make perfect sense to the end of suppressing our fertility. And that is something worth pondering, I believe. Regardless, the fact is fertility rates are now so well suppressed in the industrialized world that fertility has reached only replacement levels, and within much of Europe they are now even much lower than that. Now, we are told over and over that we're getting richer and richer, but the fact remains we are finding it harder than ever to have children at the healthier times of our lives, and in healthy ways. We are doing unnecessary damage to ourselves in the name of, in terms of what it looks like at least, a messy form of population control. Really, we would be much better off accepting direct caps on fertility, when and as they may be required, instead of suppressing fertility by simply making it so hard for people to have children, which, wittingly or not, is exactly what we're doing today. Because the problem with hardship-style population control is it makes it hard to have children well. Yes, you get your lowered fertility rates, but you don't get the happiest of families or the healthiest of children. Some further notes. Social welfare. There is another important dynamic to the modern breeding game. Though we've done a great job of making it hard for people to bring up children well, conversely, we have also done a great job of making it easy for people to have children and bring them up badly. Adolf Hitler and his merry men demonized the idea of controlled breeding so profoundly that we as a society have now gone to the other extreme. We let absolutely anyone, in any state of health and mind, have as many kids as they want, no questions asked. Where they fail financially, the state comes in with welfare, understandably for the sake of the children. Now, is this such a great idea? Do we really want to let people who can only be described as a mess, due to their own ghastly childhood, go on to have as many children as they want, when we can know, almost certainly, that their children will be abused and neglected? We need to look closely at what we're doing here and ask some tough questions about the long-term impact of modern welfare policy. This is, of course, an incredibly sensitive topic, but again we need to look at it in an objective and serious light. My video here is my best effort to that end, titled Social Welfare and Social Evolution. Genetic load. This is something that I'm not totally comfortable commenting on, but to be complete, I must. Every group of animals suffers from what is called genetic load, which is the accumulation of deleterious mutations that naturally builds up over time through imperfect reproduction. Nature, being the brute that she is, solves this problem by leaving the less fit members of the group to die of their own shortcomings. This is hardly desirable in the modern world, of course, but sooner or later we may have to confront this concern so as to ensure that most people can go on to live healthy and long lives. Yes, I'm talking about negative eugenics. As a society, we may have to consider some degree of controlled breeding to achieve and sustain good health, because the alternative situation may be much less desirable over time. We are already moving in this direction, I will note. For example, we are more inclined to scan a fetus and abort it as soon as we identify serious disorders, insofar as we can. Conclusion. Clearly, there is a great deal that people can do on the individual level to help create good people, which is the most progressive thing any society can do, generally speaking. And a lot of what needs to be done is just relieving people of their ignorance. Trauma hurts kids, permanently, and we badly underestimate the trauma that typically happens at and around the time of birth. For more detail, you might like to check out my blog post titled, Are You Pregnant? But we also need to clean things up on the collective level as a society. Taking a hard look at the evolution of Western society, I must conclude that we're starting to really miss the plot. It seems to be getting ever harder to bring up children and well. And frankly, so much of what we have done in terms of social policy is just plain stupid. Solving this problem requires thinking about what the government is doing, rather than just reacting to it, and playing the ball that's handed to you. As a society, we are being punished, in effect, for our political apathy. Most of us only focus on the demands handed to us on our lives, when really we should be focusing on the manipulation of those demands as well. So again, I hope we can start to have an intelligent discussion about what we are doing and what we are not doing about targeting and prioritizing positive human fertility. Surely, positive fertility is amongst the most important objectives of any society. And from a naturalistic perspective, achieving positive fertility is indeed the most authentic expression of success. Though this is obviously an issue that concerns everyone, my focus is on women, because they are the hand that rocks the cradle. Women are at the centre of this game. I see them as the primary political force that can drive things in the right direction. Thank you.